Hello. Thank you to eTrust for inviting me to speak at what looks like a wonderful conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. By the time this conference starts, I'll be in the US talking at the Reading League conference. This time I'll be talking about something called the four-step process, but that's a story for another day. What we're talking about today is the developing scene in New Zealand. Because what I think you have, and I'm not alone in thinking this, I'm sure you're aware of it too, but what I think you have is an incredible opportunity. Before I expound on that, let me introduce myself. There's a lot of things that I do. My career has led me to do several things, and so I don't really have a title as such. I just have put it into this chart to perhaps make it easier to understand. My degree was in linguistics, and as soon as I graduated, I worked in a specialist clinic for children and adults that were struggling with literacy. I often found, though, even with the really good training that I had at that time, that there were some things that children needed to know that weren't in any of the materials that I'd been trained in or any of the resources that I found. So I started writing them myself, especially when it comes to spelling and when it comes to grammar and syntax and when it comes to morphology and even when it comes to writing. There wasn't enough. And I still don't think there is enough on the market in terms of widespread resources to teach these things properly. So I started to write books about that. And because of that, people asked me to train them in the material that was in the books. So I create programs as well, and I share what works with other educators. This then informs my school coaching. So I'll work with schools and systems all across the world to try to lift their practice to a better and better standard all the time, specifically when it comes to spelling, morphology, syntax, and so on. Sometimes I don't know all the answers. So one of the things I get to do is that I get to collaborate with lots of experts in the field, because education is actually a field filled with very generous people. And what I do is I run masterclasses with experts in the field who'll talk about things that I'm not expert at. You know, things like cognitive load theory and writing assessment, that sort of thing. And then that helps me to teach students again, and it goes round and round like this. So that's me. My handle is lifelonglit on Twitter. And the hashtag that I usually use is structured literacy if you are doing live tweeting. So what we're going to talk about today, well, I need to start with a small historical note. I'm not going to explain New Zealand's history to you. You already know that, but I think we need to start there. Then we need to look at the wider Anglophone world. So Anglophone means English speaking. So there have been a lot of inquiries throughout the Anglophone world into the teaching of literacy. And we need to look at that because there are quite a few countries within the Anglophone world that are a little bit further on in their journey away from whole language and into structured literacy. So one of the things that I want to do is maybe look at or help you look at some of the pitfalls, some of the things that those countries did, because I work all around the world, that you might be able to avoid as a nation so that you reach that goal of a higher standard of literacy for all sooner. I never complain, though, without offering a solution. So we will do some exercises on, well, if I don't teach that, then what do I teach? Starting with history. The Snow Report by Pamela Snow. I suggest strongly that you read it. I'm going to give you a second to read through the quote that I've taken from there. Now, what I like about it is that it says New Zealand has played a key role since the 1970s. Won't say in what, well, it does say in what, but the key role. Your country has played a key role in getting an idea out to the rest of the world. And I think that's amazing. Sadly, it was the ideas of Marie Clay. And as you can see from this chart on the right-hand side, the Pearls scores, and that's the Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, which is an international assessment and research project designed to measure reading achievement at the 4th grade level, as well as school and teacher practices related to instruction. This report over the last 20 years has shown, and this light green line here is New Zealand, has shown that New Zealand's Pearl scores is on a steady decline. Other nations, we've got England here, from the year 2001 has shown an upward trajectory. Same with Singapore here and Australia. They've all had upward trajectories, although Australia in the last year or so hasn't done quite as well. However, as you can see, well, you're pretty aware of the fact that New Zealand's reading scores have not been good for a long time. Now, Australia and England have all had national inquiries into the teaching of literacy. And since then, reading scores have taken something of an upward trajectory. I'm not suggesting that there should be a national inquiry into the teaching of literacy in New Zealand, though it might be a good idea. But what I am saying is you're already set towards that upward trajectory. How can you make it go faster? How can you make this line come right up into the other standards? Let's look at some of the national inquiries that these countries were involved in. Firstly, we had the National Reading Panel in the United States, and these are the United States NAEP scores. So I don't have the United States graphed on here, but if you look at this graph, this is age 9 reading and age 13 reading. As you can see from the year 1971, there's been an upward trend. It's not dramatic. Same with age 9 reading, an upward but not dramatic trend, but upward nonetheless. In the year 2000, the National Reading Panel released a report and made a multi-million-dollar inquiry into what was going wrong with teaching reading. And from that point, you can see quite a nice upward swing in NAEP scores. But there it is, plateauing off right there. So what happened? What's going on? I'll give you my opinion as to what I think happened, why these plateaus exist, so that when you do finally start moving that graph here, and you will, that it is a nice steep upward trajectory and doesn't plateau off. We're trying to avoid plateauing. Then there was the Rose Report in 2006 in the United Kingdom. And as you can see, this is England's scores. 2006 down here, since the Rose Report, people started changing and up went that trajectory. But look, another plateau, if not a slight decline. Very recently in Canada, there was a right to read inquiry in Ontario. And what we'll probably see is that upward swing and then a plateau, unless, of course, they do something to avoid the plateau. These scores, remember, don't represent the 95% of the population who could learn to acquire literacy. That's where we want those lines to go, not to plateau off somewhere in the middle. So how do we avoid the plateaus? Well, let's see what they got right, first of all. All of those nations, after their inquiries, got a few things right. Many of them brought in phonics screening checks. In Australia, there are some that are mandatory in some states. And in the UK, the phonics screening check is mandatory. What that is just a low stakes, very quick test for very young students. It's year 2, I do believe, to see whether or not they've got their essential grapheme phoneme correspondences. It doesn't take long, but it certainly gives us a screener where we can highlight or where we can identify children that are not getting it, and we can intervene. It's a really powerful thing. Also, what all of these nations got right was their understanding of phonological awareness and how important that is to reading, what a foundation for reading that is. So that's sensitivity to the sounds and sound patterns in words. So understanding of PA was key there. Also, in recent times, what I've seen as a school coach all the way around the world is that acceptance of orthographic mapping as a concept has really been helpful as well in getting that upward trajectory. If you accept that as a concept and you understand what goes in to orthographic mapping and what it is, it's a type of memory, it's how we remember words. If you really do have a good basic grounding in that, then it's very difficult to then justify asking children to guess at words or to take their eyes off the page or to look at a picture and so on. So it's a really key concept to orthographic mapping. And that's what those nations did right. They also accepted a structured approach to teaching reading. And when I say structured, I mean scope and sequence. This is how far this approach is going to take you, and this is the sequence in which you teach these things. A lot of the time, it used to be random before that, and it probably still is in lots and lots of classrooms and systems. But an acceptance of those structured approaches is what they got right. It's why they moved the needle on reading scores nationally. However, there are bits that they got wrong as well. We're going to look at these bits in a little bit more depth, but just to give you an overview, we're going to talk about the acceptance of balanced literacy, because in every single one of those countries, despite millions of dollars worth of inquiries saying you need to do systematic, synthetic, phonics, and structured literacy, there's still a very, very strong acceptance of balanced literacy. Also, in my view, brand shopping is a killer. And we'll go into brand shopping in a minute. The other one is an over-focus on reading. I know that all of these inquiries were to do with the teaching of reading, but what that's done is it's made everybody focus on that when there's another thing that children need to do well to function in a complex society, and that's writing. But we'll come back to that. All of those inquiries recommended that systematic synthetic phonics was probably a really, really good idea. But what that's done is it's led to an obsession with phoneme-grapheme correspondences. And it's led to a lot of people that don't have a depth and breadth of knowledge about the writing system to cash in on selling programs and selling their scopes and sequences and selling big charts and resources and so on, all to do with phonics. And that's a problem as well, which we'll go over which we'll go over shortly. Let's look at the acceptance of balanced literacy first of all. You're probably already seeing acceptance of phonics and phonological awareness by many, but many of those also prefer to cling to things like predictable readers and running records and reading comprehension as the journey and the destination, all in the name of balance. Now, you're not going to be able to change everyone's mind, but there are ways of deciding how to spend your time and energy so that you can get the best deal possible for your students. What I try to do is identify 3 very broad types in education. The first is the early adopters. These are the lifelong learners, and they are your best allies. And even though at first they might want to cling to some form of balanced literacy, the data that they're confronted with when they use structured literacy is irrefutable, incontrovertible, and they're your best allies. Look out for the early adopters and the lifelong learners. There's another type called the blissful plodder, and these are either people going towards the end of their career or people who just don't have the capacity to understand the type of breadth and depth that you need when it comes to explaining the writing system to students. They're not really worth your energy. They'll never really change. It's beyond their capacity to change. And then you've got rigid idealists, and I talk about them a lot. They're important. Rigid idealists, those who will not accept any of any new things that you're trying to show them, who will cling to this life raft of whole language and balanced literacy. They're really important because when you're producing counter arguments, when you're talking about why something doesn't work, rigid idealists are helpful for shedding light on the irrationality, the belief system, the cult-like behavior that goes on in whole language balanced literacy reading recovery circles. So they're really important, and sometimes you can get through to them. And that conversion, and I don't mean to make it sound too religious here because I'm very suspicious of cult-like behavior, but if you can convert them and get them to think with what you're saying, that is a huge coup. They then become those lifelong learners. They then become your best allies. Unfortunately, you can't turn blissful plodders into anything useful. So know your type. Now, brand shopping is a belief that there's one program, one chart, one scope and sequence document that's going to provide that magic bullet. It's not true. And what happens is, and what I've seen happen in lots of the schools that I've consulted to over the years and over the world, is that the schools that call themselves an X-brand school are the ones that plateau off much, much earlier. They're the ones that hit brick walls because they're stuck with these brands. Whereas the schools that are dedicated to continuing to build teacher knowledge are the ones that time and time again keep raising the capacity of their teachers and the standards of their students. So teacher knowledge rather than brands is going to do this. Beware the brand, beware the practitioner who says, I'm an X brand practitioner. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And the writing system is very complex. There is no one brand that's going to help teachers explain that in a box, right? Teachers need this information actually at Teachers College. We've got a long way to go because Teachers College, well, that really is where the rigid idealists and the blissful plodders live. And they're the ones that are teaching teachers. But we've got, it's a story for another day again. Another thing that will counter brand shopping is well-informed leadership. Well-informed leadership is the magic bullet, because instead of going from brand to brand and then throwing up their hands and saying, look, none of that worked, what well-informed leadership knows is that teacher knowledge is the most important thing. Just to reiterate, brand X will not do this. So if you shop from brand to brand, there is a danger of giving up and saying, nope, this is not working. We're going back to reading recovery, right? We need to talk about an overfocus on reading as well. The thing is, writing is the hard part. Writing is not reading in reverse. Writing takes much, much, much longer to develop. It requires a longer runway and much more expert teaching at the teacher level than reading. Handwriting also is vital. And in this busy curriculum, handwriting sometimes is the first thing to go. I've seen it over and over again. Well, we've got to do 15 minutes of phonological awareness, and then we've got to play this slideshow from this brand, and then we've got to do some reading from this text, and then we've got to do some comprehension strategies. We don't have time for handwriting. You got to make time for handwriting. Handwriting is vital to writing development, which is vital to reading development and overall literacy development. Modeling is vital. So again, buying that brand that's got all the slideshows, that's a problem when it comes to writing, right? Just having students read things off a slideshow and never seeing the teacher form letters on a board. 75% of your literacy block should be you, right? Writing at the very beginning, in the early years at school, should be you modeling that. That's what they're looking at. They're not looking at if they're looking at a slideshow, what you have there is just whole words. Modeling is vital. Meta language is vital. How students communicate within themselves, to themselves, about letter formation is vital. Having a consistent meta language across the years is absolutely vital. And New Zealand, you're a very small country. You could have one handwriting approach that goes throughout primary school. Do you know, in Australia, they've got all of these different approaches. They've got Victorian cursive and New South Wales cursive and goodness knows what else. And nobody agrees on the meta language. So, and it's even worse, even if a school system has some approach to handwriting, if a child moves interstate, they've got to start all over again. Don't fall into that trap. Choose an approach to handwriting that gives children consistent meta language and requires the teacher to do a lot of modeling, and you'll be laughing. Then there's the obsession with phoneme grapheme correspondences. To help me think about all of the different layers of the writing system, I came up with this model. Now, if you're teaching one letter, one sound, that's a really, really good start. That's the code, right? And that's brilliant. You can't stop there, can you, though? I mean, that would be terrible if all you did, right, was get the alphabet and go A is A, B is B, and you never did anything else. Because if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So whatever letter sequences are coming up, they're all going to look like exceptions to A, B, B if they're not doing what you expected them to do. So that's not very good. But of course, any good phonics program will have additional common sounds. So the letter A, well, that can also say its name, A. Teaching that is a brilliant idea. And even letter combinations, like the letter T is T and the letter H is H, but together they are, I hope you all said or right? That's a really good thing as well. You can't stop there, though. If you stop there, what you're teaching is English as if it's one giant code, and it's not. You see this, if you go on to Teachers Pay Teachers and ask for a phoneme chart, just search for a phoneme chart, you're going to get stuff like this. I mean, it's really pretty, right? But my goodness me, over 180 graphemes. That's not true. There aren't 180 graphemes in English. There really aren't. What this is a hammer approach. We're just teaching these parts of the writing system, when actually the writing system consists of that. These are all the other tools that you need, not just a hammer, but orthographic expectancies, what letter sequences are doing what you would expect them to do. Morphology, uncommon spellings, and etymology. You need to get good at all of this. Don't fall into this trap. That's what those Anglophone plateau countries did. They fell into this trap and they became obsessed with phoneme grapheme correspondences, thus not investing anything in orthographic expectancies, that is spelling rules. Rules are important, and morphology and etymology, and trying to explain uncommon spellings by having children learn yet more graphemes. It's a real problem. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I'm going to show you an excerpt from a report that we got at Lifelong Literacy. I run a practice where we see hundreds of students, and we got a report from a local X-brand tutor who was using X-brand to provide intervention for one of her students. We'll call the student Emily. Read this with me. I'm very concerned regarding Emily's spelling choices. This is Emily's challenge. Her reading and comprehension is of a high standard, as is her ability to have great ideas for sentences and stories. It is Emily's spelling choices that are holding her back. So that was in the report to us, because the tutor, the X-brand tutor, couldn't work with her anymore, didn't know what to do. So when we said, well, what are your concerns? She said, it's Emily's spelling choices, right? Next, she said, she was choosing the incorrect spelling combinations almost all the time. Now, why do you think that is? Well, I know. And then her tutor went on to say, we will revise a sound. Now, stop there. We will revise a sound. Emily was in grade, I think she was in grade 3 when she came to us, and she had no expressive language problems. Why are you revising sounds? She can speak. There's no need to revise a sound. She's already got that. The entire soundscape, all sewn up. Don't revise the sounds, right? She doesn't need that. Anyway, we will revise a sound and do all of the usual activities in revision, but she seemed to spell with the wrong letter choice. And as you can see, there's choices there. Then came the thought, I'm wondering if Emily needs more time to complete her writing and spelling, and emphasize listening to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing them. And I know that there are a few people here in the audience that go, well, what's wrong with that? I'll show you in a second. From that, though, because she couldn't help Emily anymore because she was an X-brand tutor, then came the toxic thought. I also wonder if Emily has a short-term, long-term memory issue. And I call it a toxic thought because when a practitioner starts to think like that, they are often thinking, it can't be me, it must be her. It can't be my teaching, it's got to be her brain. And that's what X-brand will do to you, because you're sold, right? You're sold on this idea that you have this magic bullet. And when that magic bullet doesn't reach its target, Well, there's something wrong with the target. So this is the bit that kept haunting me. Listening to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing them. Now, a complex orthography like English, if you go back to that diagram, that's what makes it complex. I'll just show you the diagram again. A complex orthography doesn't stop here. A complex orthography has these layers. So in a complex orthography like English, it shouldn't be taught as if it's transparent, because what it results in is approaches like listening to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing them. Now, how's that going to help her with homophones? Because if you listen to the words there, and there prior to writing them and the sounds in each word, how's that going to help you? You're and you're, principal, except. And in some accents, poor, and paw, right? How's that going to help her? How will that help her with schwa? Look at the words definitely and necessary. You can't listen to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing these ones if you don't already have a mental orthographic image of these words. You're not going to know which vowel to write. How is listening to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing them going to help her with syllable elision? There are lots of words where we collapse syllables, like restaurant, Wednesday, camera. How is listening to each word and the sounds in each word prior to writing them? Well, the answer is it's not. Balanced literacy creates poor readers, but teaching a complex orthography as if it's transparent creates poor spellers. Don't fall into that trap. It's a pitfall. English spelling has underlying morphemic layers. It has underlying etymological layers, and it has rules. That's what makes it complex. The solution is to invest in that, not to ignore it. And so many countries in the Anglophone world ignored it, hence the plateau. Teaching 150 to 200 spellings will get you a poor return on your investment. Beware. It haunts me. So what I've done to try and help solve some of this problem is a false grapheme inventory, and I use this in my training. What I've got here is it's just digraphs. I've taken a list of the alphabet left and right, and I've put the combinations together that I see in phonics programs introduced as graphemes, and they're all false. They're not actual graphemes at all. There may be a whole bunch that surprise you, and again, it's part of my training to go into all of these graphemes and what to do instead. But we'll pick a couple, all right? When all you have is a hammer, so from the false grapheme inventory, everything looks like a nail. You need another tool. And here's the tool. This word cupboard, for instance, in a phoneme grapheme obsessed approach, a teacher might say, well, I need to teach children how to spell cupboard. How do I map that? How do I code it? I can't hear the P. Oh, no. If spelling is speech written down, which it's not, spelling is thought written down. If spelling is speech written down, which symbol that I can hear do I attach that to? Right? So back to the false grapheme inventory, I've actually seen a number of programs that have PB as a spelling for the sound B, as in cupboard, because teachers are trained to think, if spelling is speech written down, which symbol can I hear that I attach this letter P to? My answer is, dude, it's literally cup and board, as in sideboard, not that PB is a grapheme that you now have to remember that spells the sound B. That's nonsense. Another complex code horror story. How about this one? TG is a spelling for the sound G, as in mortgage. I've seen that in a really expensive Australian spelling program. PT is a spelling for the sound T, as in pterodactyl. No, it's not. DNE is a spelling for the sound N, as in Wednesday. That's bonkers, right? Instead of great big lists and graphs and charts, good spellers actually use mnemonics. Mnemonics are techniques to assist the retention and retrieval of information in long-term memory. But actually, the word mnemonics contains this base, M-N-E, and it's to do with the memory and mind. You can see it surfacing in amnesia, and the M there is not, the M and the N are not a spelling for the sound N. Otherwise, it'd be amnesia, wouldn't it? It's amnesia. It's not that MN has to be remembered as a piece of code for the sound N. They won't remember it. For novices, sound symbol correspondences are really good mnemonics, right? They help us to retrieve and store words in long-term memory. That's brilliant. Hooray, phonics. But once the alphabet is taken care of, and we're talking about those 3 top layers, sound to symbol, other common sounds associated with those symbols, and letter combinations. Once that's taken care of, then orthography, the rules that govern this whole system, morphology, etymology, all provide mnemonics too. And that's the bit where you can't really get a brand in. You've got to continue increasing teacher knowledge, teacher capacity. I'll give you one last example. One, right? How can you help with irregularity, right? Because you'll get this question all the time. How do I map the word one? Well, again, you can put it into a word mapping tool like this, and you get this absolutely bonkers response, right? That the O and the E are somehow representing the sound W. I mean, I can't go there. This is what happens when all you have is a hammer, okay? You've got to use other things. So I'll show you. One is actually the morpheme O-N, and it's got final silent E on there, rewritten as O-N-E. And when I want to spell it, I say O-N-E-1, right? You got to teach letter names of the alphabet as well. It's really important. Those are mnemonics as well. A long time ago, it used to be pronounced something like own, right? But the E doesn't have that effect anymore. It's not that the O and the E are a grapheme and they're split by the N. That's nonsense. It's not that the N and the E is a grapheme, a spelling for the sound N. That's not true either. It's that historically that E used to make that O say its name, but it doesn't anymore. We now pronounce that word one. So what is the O-N? What's it related to? Well, if you have O-N and L-Y, you can rewrite that as only because it means one. If you're the only thing, the only person in the room, there's one person in the room. And even if we get this word all and we add it to one, what we get is alone. Yep. Do you see how that works? That's a really good family. That's what children will remember because it's the truth about what's happening in those words rather than, our bonkers solutions here. It's not transferable and it doesn't actually mean anything. So I've bent your ear enough. We're going to sum up. How to avoid the pitfalls. You've got a real opportunity, New Zealand, to go somewhere really fast and to get a really strong upward trajectory. So here's some things that I would recommend that you remember as a nation. Firstly, phoneme-grapheme correspondences do exist, but not alone. There are other layers. You've got to go beyond the extended code. There's actually no such thing as the extended code. Once you've done those 3 top layers in that diagram, you need to be getting on with morphology, etymology, and the rules that surround letter sequences in English. And this also, by the way, with morphology and etymology especially, this actually helps us to talk to maybe the rigid idealists about adopting these approaches. Because when you talk about morphology, you're talking about meaning, right? Morphemes are meaningful units a lot of the time, meaningful or structural units. Use this information to promote meaning to the rigid idealists, to the people that don't want to let it go. Are you meaning focused? Great, because morphology is all about meaning, straight to comprehension, and so on. You can use this to your advantage. To avoid the pitfalls, remember, asking this question, what are the sounds in X word, is not a great question. I got a better question for you. What is the structure of X and what are its relatives? If you ask that question when you're trying to figure out how to study words, you will never be disappointed. I'd like to end with this. You have one national government. That puts you at a huge advantage. You don't have to wrestle all of these states together and so on. You also have the advantage of hindsight, not just your hindsight with taking reading recovery to the world and what that did in terms of decimating the literacy population, but you've got the hindsight of lots of other Anglophone countries that have gone before you in making these big changes. Use that hindsight well. You also did this at scale, and you exported it to the entire world once before. This time, make it wonderful. Kia kaha.